Hey yo, what's up everybody? Today we're diving into a company that permeates through tons of different games and services across the internet. Services like Netflix, Amazon Prime Video, and NordVPN. Games like FIFA, Arc Raiders, and Marvel Rivals. MOBA and Gacha games like Honkai Star Rail, Wuthering Waves, and Genshin Impact. This is not a sponsor. Oh, it's quite the opposite. The company I want to talk about today is U7Buy, and why you should probably not ever utilize their services. If you're a creator, you shouldn't promote them, and if you're a consumer, you shouldn't buy. Because a point that I want to stick with you throughout this video is how you do a thing is how you do everything. Because you see, mistakes can happen, but there's only so many before it becomes a pattern of behavior you need to look out for. Founded in 2008 in Hong Kong, this company is largely used as a third-party top-up site for various forms of media. Now, if the name U7Buy sounds familiar to my usual viewers, it's probably because they sponsored me about a month ago. And for that, I want to apologize. I'm sorry for introducing you guys to such a shit company. I'm sorry for introducing you guys to a company that I now feel has questionable credibility and is ethically unsound. Now, I usually try to be careful about sponsors that I put into my content. I remember vividly arguing with a potential sponsor about what they wanted me to say in their promotion before ultimately declining. However, even while being careful, sometimes you're still bound to slip up every once in a while. And for that, I apologize. So, what happened? Why the change of heart? What sparks these newfound sentiments? Well, they didn't pay me. Now, this wasn't just a delay or a matter of them just being late. It was an outright refusal. After having done pretty much exactly what they'd asked me to do, and after having done it, they told me they weren't going to pay me. And I want to go into why they said this and why it might have been their plan from the very beginning. But first, let's talk about what I learned post-pay refusal, because this ultimately prompted me to look further into their company and their practices outside of what they provide as a source of customer satisfaction. Because you see, when this company contacts you for a promotion, they'll always be sure to boast about their Trustpilot reviews. In fact, in your promotion, they require you to bring this up. And every other person who I've heard do an ad for them must have also been required to do the same thing, because I also hear them tout their Trustpilot reviews, how they're trusted by over 100 million people, how they have over 30K positive Trustpilot reviews. And it seems like this or some version of this is in every ad. And that's probably because they don't want you Googling their name. They probably don't even want you typing in their homepage for fear that you might accidentally just forget to put .com and are entered into a search result that shows what people are really saying about this company. Now, for legal purposes, I'm not saying or suggesting their Trustpilot reviews are in any way fraudulent or artificially inflated, but let's just say that there are a lot of dissenting opinions on their quality when you search outside of the sources they provided. Random but interesting fact: the vast majority of publicly named employees of U7Buy don't seem to be Chinese in heritage. While that's not a problem, it's just strange for a company based in Hong Kong. Listen, I've worked with a lot of Chinese companies before. Within a typical Chinese company, there might be some people who aren't Chinese, or even some who take on a foreign name to ease communication with foreign clients. But these employees not only don't have a Chinese name, don't look Chinese, but they aren't even in China. You don't find that suspicious? But I digress. Let's talk about my experience with U7Buy before researching the company. Let this be a cautionary tale, because remember, how you do a thing is how you do everything. When they first contacted me about promoting their service, they initially presented a very high pay range for this project. I was surprised. It was higher than I was expecting for my viewership. However, after I began discussing with them, the pay rate soon decreased dramatically. There's nothing wrong with that on the surface, as sometimes the terms of a deal can shift and negotiation can happen in these type of conversations. However, what I found odd was as we continued to talk, the baseline required number of videos and the minimum pay range shifted. The required number of videos went up and the pay range went down. Again, this is okay, but not randomly as the discussion goes on. You have to make it known that you're changing something. There needs to be a reason. Tell me you forgot to factor in my average community engagement rate. Maybe my YouTube banner needs to feature your logo to get the full rate. Perhaps you just don't like the color of my profile picture. Whatever. Of course, these are all frivolous reasons, but you get the point. There needs to be a basis for this change, and this change needs to be announced, not slightly altered as the discussion moves forward, as if it were the same as previously discussed. When you just randomly change up the pay rate, it comes across as deceptive. And when I politely pointed this out by saying, hey, the values changed, is this correct? My concerns were just brushed away as if it didn't just happen. I reiterated with a screenshot, and still they failed to acknowledge this even ever happened. And I reiterated the original price, and we just went with that as if that's what they just said, even though it wasn't. Now, despite this glowing red flag, I couldn't tell if English was this person's first language or not, so I just simply let it go. By the way, never do this. There would continue to be oddities in the agreement, and they would later use these oddities to justify not paying me later. The tagline of U7Buy's website is cheap, safe, and fast. However, before promoting the brand, I wanted to make a purchase just to see what the experience was like and to be able to honestly say that I did purchase from them and to honestly be able to say how it works. Going back to their tagline for a minute, fast. That isn't a word I would use to describe their service. While I did receive my order, it was literal hours before my digital goods were delivered. And for those who don't know, for these types of purchases, you're encouraged to not log in the intermediary to avoid being potentially banned. So imagine having to wait for hours for something that their competitors do in minutes. As a result, I never included the word fast in my promotion because unlike when I promoted competing products, U7Buy is slow as fuck. Another tenet of U7Buy's tagline is cheap. Now, I didn't find it necessary to make this comparison prior to promoting, so this comes from what I'm able to currently see online right now after the fact. So I don't know if the values were different at the time. However, the fact is, U7Buy comes in last place when comparing its prices to its competition across numerous products. And when it comes to the last remaining tenet of their motto, safe, perhaps I should count myself fortunate, especially when I take a look at the numerous negative reviews I later found scattered across the internet. After experiencing their purchasing process, I looked at the contract their representative sent so I could go ahead and solidify the deal. The contract was weird. There were tons of misspelled words, incorrect grammar, and odd highlighted text. One highlighted section at the very bottom of the contract read, if the number of views after promotion drops more than 30% compared to the number at the time of the contract negotiation, the price needs to be renegotiated at any time. If no agreement can be reached, the cooperation will be terminated. Another section reads, U7Buy shall pay Party B according to the number of videos last month. If Party B does not reach the specified quantity in the contract, that means Party B won't get the full payment if he fails to promote U7Buy as promised in the contract. By the way, none of these quote-unquote cautions or breaches of contract were ever met, and I'll come back to them, but they're pretty shit to have in an agreement in the first place. Here's why. Outside of massive creators, the vast majority of people in the YouTube space can experience large fluctuations in views. Some of my contemporaries in the space, regardless of sub count, get similar views to myself. Everyone from Ethan to Amethyst Abrams to Faros to Kaijo TV, Sometimes one of us makes a video and it takes off and it gets a lot of views, and sometimes not. You can make the same video 3 times. It might take off the first time, maybe getting a couple thousand views. The second time, it may only get a couple hundred views. And you may make the same video again a third time, and it may get tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of views. Nonetheless, the work involved in creating the content doesn't change all that much, especially for faceless channels. And for this promotion, I was literally creating more videos than I usually do, pretty much to fill the quantity required by the agreement and my other separate agreement. I made a total of 8 videos, which was a challenge for myself. For those who follow my content, they know that I typically only produce around 4, maybe 5 videos a month because I don't really have a lot of extra time. I'm not a full-time content creator. I do other things. Speaking of that, allow me to interject to say this. I actually have a separate business, and in that business, I never really went back on any agreement. Now, it's different if I'm talking with a party and we can't come to an agreement. But once an agreement is had, I stick to it. Maybe the agreed compensation is money, maybe it's products, maybe it's free photography. Whatever it is, they get it. And I've worked with creators from only a couple hundred followers to literally tens of millions of followers. It doesn't matter, because as long as a creator performed the promotion faithfully, I can't blame them. Whether or not I get a conversion, I can't blame them on how many people view or click. They did the promotion. They did their job. So in this situation with U7Buy, for me, it really isn't as much about the money as it is about the disrespect and breach of trust for not doing what you said you were going to do. So why did I sign? Well, I'd seen a few promotions about this company by other creators and thought, it should be safe, right? Everybody else is promoting it. And I figured there's no way they try to get over on me like this. I thought, hey, they're probably just a small company just trying to make it. That's probably why their contract has so many spelling errors and grammar mistakes. That's why it probably has so many oddities. And hey, you know what? All contracts have some oddities here or there, right? And finally, I was sure, I was confident that even if my views didn't reach the same number as they were the previous month, in this case January, they wouldn't drop more than 30%. So I'm safe. And guess what? After doing everything requested, after 6 videos, after mentioning the specific talking points they wanted in the promotion, after putting a link in the description of each video, after placing a pinned comment on each video, after placing another link on the profile page, after everything they asked me to do, my views didn't drop. They didn't fall below the 30% that was previously mentioned. However, in the end, after having completed all those videos, contact from them was radio silent. I reached out and they had me wait another week. Afterwards, they said the views didn't reach the required numbers and they weren't going to pay me the remaining amount. And to clarify, when I say remaining amount, I meant that they paid half up front, but refused to pay the back end or the second half of the payment. And when I asked why, they said I needed to look at the contract for clarification because it's all there. Remember what I said earlier? Remember when I said it might have been their plan from the very beginning? Well, here's how their terms ensured I wouldn't, or rather, it would be extremely unlikely for me to reach the determined figure. At the top of the contract, near my personal information, they had my YouTube creator info already written. And in this info, they listed my stats, my channel name, my channel link, my sub count, and they also had one more thing listed. They listed my average views, and they had them listed at 6K. The thing is, my average views aren't 6K. Some videos I make, they take off, and maybe I get 30K, maybe I get 100K, maybe even get 300K, but that isn't the average. In fact, Doing the math and averaging out the views for the prior month, it literally equals just below half, meaning they doubled my average view count in this description, making it extremely unlikely for me to reach the view count listed, making it so that they could get the promotion for half of the original price. And when I brought this up to their representative and brought up how they were already familiar with my channel from the very beginning, or at least that's what they said in their email, they essentially hid behind the contract, saying, well, that's in the past, and you've already agreed to it, and you've already submitted the last video, so the terms of our contract are over. Basically saying, deal with it. I repeatedly asked them to reconsider. They did not. In fact, I was told that the decision was final, and they'd no longer be responding. How bold. How ridiculous. I mean, look at it this way. You approach me to do a promotion. Why? Because of my voice, my reach, my perceived connection to a large audience of people. Did you not think if done dirty, I wasn't going to announce this to that very audience? Like, what were you thinking? In conclusion, folks, never give these companies wiggle room, no matter how many ads you see with friendly faces. Never fall for the small company, different first language, internal justification. Never take your foot off their necks. Because how they did this is likely how they do everything. And because if I can't trust them, how can you? Hit that like button to help this video go viral, to let this be an anti-ad and act as a PSA against these predatory practices. That's all I have for you guys today. Catch you in the waves. Peace.